Every path hides a destination. This one ends in murder. Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. Where are you watching from tonight? Share it below. Your comments mean so much to me. Let's uncover the truth. It had been raining. Since before dawn. The sort of thin, patient rain that doesn't lash at the windows, but seeps into everything. Maigret sat at the small kitchen table of the flat on Boulevard Richard Lenoir, the one he had shared with Louise for more than 20 years. The table smelled faintly of coffee and damp wool. His coat hung on the rack by the door, dripping onto the linoleum. Louise, in her dressing gown, was slicing bread with a slow, practiced rhythm, her eyes half on him, half on the radio murmuring in the background. "You'll be late if you don't leave soon," she said without urgency, glancing at the clock. He grunted an acknowledgement but didn't move. It wasn't that he had anywhere pressing to be. The day promised nothing more than paperwork, a few calls to the examining magistrate, perhaps a routine follow-up on a burglary in the 17th. He sipped his coffee and looked at the condensation on the window, where the blurred shapes of passers-by drifted past like ghosts. It was this kind of morning that put him in a mood, not melancholy exactly, but a sort of heightened awareness. The city felt slower, quieter, as though it were holding its breath. When he finally rose to fetch his coat, Louise spoke again, this time with that casual tone she used when she was thinking of something else. "I saw Madame Duroc yesterday," she said. "She was upset about something, though she wouldn't say. Something about her brother-in-law coming to stay." Maigret gave a small nod, his mind already moving past the remark. He had known the Durocs for years, in the way you know people you pass on the street or see at the grocer's, enough to exchange greetings, but never enough to linger. They lived out past the canal, in one of those modest houses with narrow strips of garden. By the time he stepped outside, the rain had grown finer, more like a mist clinging to his hat brim. The office was only half an hour away, but halfway there he decided to take the tram instead, letting it rattle through neighborhoods that smelled faintly of wet leaves and coal smoke. He liked these in-between journeys. They gave him the chance to look at people without speaking, the shopkeepers sweeping their steps, the school children darting under awnings, the woman in a heavy coat standing with a paper bag clutched to her chest as though guarding something fragile. It was just before noon when the telephone call came. Lucas, his voice slightly muffled by the line, said, "Chief, there's something odd in the 19th. A body in a garden. An old man. Looks natural, maybe. But the neighbors called us because of the way he was lying." Maigret didn't rush. He finished the cigarette he had lit, stubbed it out with deliberate care, and reached for his coat. There was something in Lucas's voice. Not alarm exactly, but the faint unease of a man describing a room where the furniture had been moved just enough to disturb the eye. The 19th arrondissement felt even damper than the rest of Paris, its narrow streets lined with small houses whose gardens in weather like this seemed sodden and secretive. At the end of one of these streets was the Duroc house. Maigret saw Madame Duroc standing just inside the gate, her hands clasped tightly, her mouth a small pale line. The body was at the far end of the garden, near a patch of ivy climbing a brick wall. From a distance, it might have been a man who had sat down to rest and simply fallen asleep. But as Maigret walked the length of the garden path, his shoes sinking slightly into the wet soil, he saw what Lucas meant. The man's head was tilted back unnaturally, his coat neatly buttoned, his shoes too clean for the muddy ground. No one spoke. Rain tapped softly on the leaves overhead. Maigret stood over the body for a long moment, breathing in the mingled smells of damp earth and something faintly chemical. Then he turned to Madame Duroc, who flinched almost imperceptibly under his gaze. He had no theory yet, no suspicion worth naming. But something in the quiet arrangement of the scene, the neatness, the odd stillness of the man's face, settled into Maigret's mind like a weight. It wasn't officially his case yet. But he knew, as surely as he knew the taste of his morning coffee, that he wouldn't be leaving it alone. The body, once seen, could be left alone. He told Lucas to keep the constables at the gate, no one coming in or out except the doctor and the men from the medical examiner's office when they arrived. He did not kneel beside the dead man again. He preferred to let the image of him remain as it had been, with the odd tilt of the head and the coat too carefully drawn together, like a child tucked in by someone who loved order more than warmth. He asked Madame Duroc if they might go inside. She stepped back at once, almost gratefully. The house was narrow, 1 room wide, with a short hallway that smelled of lamp oil and boiled cabbage. There was the little front room with its piano covered, in crocheted squares, a dining room with a clock that was a fraction too loud, though perhaps it only seemed loud now that people were trying not to raise their voices. The kitchen at the back looked onto the garden. The window was open a crack, and the rain had found its way inside, stippling the sink with small dark freckles. "Will you have some coffee?" she asked mechanically, finding the pot without turning her head, her gestures the gestures of someone doing what is done because one has always done. She was about 50, with hair that had been dyed to the wrong black, too glossy for her complexion. She had a narrow, pale face that would have been severe if not for the small, nervous movement at the corner of her mouth. "If it's no trouble," he said. She put the pot on the gas ring and struck a match. The flame popped with the damp. Inich. The yard beyond the glass, the ivy on the wall trembled in the rain, and a cat that must have belonged to no one paused with one paw lifted, uncertain whether to risk the mud. "Who is the man in the garden?" Maigret asked, not looking at her, only at the window as if they were both listening for something outside. She smoothed the cloth on the table with one hand. "My brother-in-law," she said, after the smallest of pauses. "Well, he was my husband's brother. He came on Tuesday. My husband isn't at home. He has been in Le Havre for a consignment for the firm. I expect him tonight. I sent a telegram. His name? Alfred Duroc. How old? 68, perhaps 69. A little older than my husband." The coffee began to breathe through the lid. Maigret took out his pipe but did not light it. There was the same faint smell in here that he had noticed above the mud, chemical but not a cleaner. Something winterish, mothballs? Yes, that was it, the smell of a cupboard emptied too soon. "Did he have his spectacles with him?" he asked, still watching the rain. She turned to him, startled. "His spectacles? He has a mark at the bridge of his nose," Maigret murmured. "Old. You can tell by the paler skin beneath. People who wear glasses do not stop wearing them without reason. I did not see any on him." Her hand went again to the tablecloth, and her mouth did that. Small movement, as if it wanted to turn up on one side but remembered in time that this was not the moment. "They were in his room," she said at last. "On the table. He didn't like to wear them in the garden. He was vain. He thought they made him look. You know how men are." He knew. Men liked to believe their eyes didn't betray them. Lucas appeared in the doorway without speaking, then withdrew, respectful of the room's quiet. After a moment, the doctor arrived, a small man who had been called from 2 streets away, his trouser hems already wet. He went straight through the house to the garden with a nod at Maigret, a nod that included the understanding that they would not hurry each other. Everything would be what it was. Where had he been before? Maigret asked when they were alone again. "Your brother-in-law." She poured the coffee, the scent of it lifting above the damp. "He has been with my sister," she said. "In Pantin. After she died, he stayed there a little. He is not good at deciding. My husband said he should come to us until he made up his mind. He arrived with 2 bags and a crate of books. He said they were important. I don't know what books can be that important when a man is 68. You saw him this morning?" She set his cup in front of him and realized too late that she had given him the cup with the crack. She took it back too quickly, changed it for the other. "I saw him after breakfast," she said. "He did not eat much. He went out to the garden with his coat. He liked to stand at the end of the path and look at the wall. He said it was like a horizon, and he could imagine other things beyond it. He was a ridiculous man in some ways." "What time was that?" 8:30, perhaps 9. "I had the laundry. I do not go to the bottom of the garden when it rains." She looked up at him, as if daring him to make something of it. He didn't. He tasted the coffee and found that it was strong and bitter. A clock somewhere struck. The half hour, and then, like a child who had not been asked to speak, struck again. In the garden, the doctor straightened his back and took off his hat to rub the rain from his forehead. He gestured with 2 fingers, delicate, like a man indicating a fish he does not want bruised. Maigret excused himself and left the coffee on the table, a dark coin cooling in the cup. "Natural?" he asked, when they stood together above the old man. "Could be," the doctor said, not wanting to give anything away too soon. "The heart, perhaps. He has the look, but—" He pursed his lips, and that was all. He was a doctor who knew how to keep a thing to himself until he had seen the inside of it. "He's very neat," he added, glancing at the coat. "Too neat for the mud." Said Maigret. He took a step aside onto the little strip of grass that bordered the path and looked down at the stones. They were old and slightly cupped from years of feet. If a man stood on them, even in this fine rain, his shoes would bloom dark at the edges. He looked at the soles of the dead man again, dry, not merely damp. One drop of water sat on the leather, like a glass bead, after which there was nothing to say. "Has anyone been in the garden since he came out?" he asked Lucas, who had come up behind them. "No one, Chief. We've had a constable at the back gate as well. It was unlocked. It opens onto the service lane." "Unlocked?" Lucas nodded. "There's a man from the next house who keeps his coal there. He says the gate is often unlocked. He's not pleased about it." Maigret looked towards the wall. The ivy shook itself, and a small trickle of brown water ran down and disappeared into the earth with the modesty of a servant. If a man wanted to place a body at the end of this path, he would not need to come through the house. He could come from the lane, lift the latch, and step inside with the discretion of someone who belonged. He let the thought sit. The doctor bent again. "See here," he murmured, his fingers not quite touching the skin beneath the jaw. A little redness. Not a bruise yet. Perhaps his collar was too tight. Or someone— He did not finish. "It will be better to say later." "Of course," said Maigret, because here everything must be said later, when the first quiet had passed. A thin figure in a dark overcoat appeared at the back gate, took in the scene with a look that said he had expected as much, and sighed as if this were a personal affront. Lognon. The gloom seemed to have rubbed off on him even more than usual. Perhaps his wife had been cross with him at breakfast. He came up the path like a man entering a doctor's waiting room without an appointment. "It will be nothing," he said by way of greeting, standing too close to Maigret as if to borrow warmth. "An old man in the rain. The heart. You might have left this to me." "Perhaps," said Maigret, and did not move away. Lognon peered at the shoes, the too neat coat, the hand laid just so on the stomach. "People fuss at the end," he added defensively, as if Maigret had accused him of something. "My cousin died in a chair with his cap on straight." "You have wise cousins," Maigret said mildly. They stood a moment like that, 3 living, men and one uncomplaining dead one, and the garden looked on with its black earth and its simple plants, which knew nothing of the neatness of coats. "Who found him?" Lognon asked. "I did," said a voice from the path. It was a neighbour, the one with the coal, a sallow man with a scarf too tight about his neck. "I came for the coal. I looked over as I often do, it's habit. The gate was open. He's always at the end of the path, that one. This time he wasn't moving." "You touched nothing," Maigret said, not as a question. "I'm not a fool," said the man, his mouth making an ugly shape around the last word, as if he liked the taste of it. Inside the house a telephone rang and stopped at once. Maigret looked over his shoulder at the kitchen window. In there the coffee would be cooling in the cracked cup that was not cracked. He felt the dull ache of the day settle into him the way the damp settled into a coat, imperceptibly, but in the end undeniably. He asked Lucas to take the neighbour's name and to keep an eye on the back lane where small events often gave themselves away. He went back inside to speak to Madame Duroc, who was sitting at the table with her hands folded now, the coffee still untouched in front of her. "He was not always here," Maigret said gently. "This morning you saw him at the end of the path. Then you had the laundry. Between then and now, did anyone come to the house?" She shook her head at once, then hesitated. "Only the baker's boy," she said, "but he comes to the front." "And the books." He kept his voice level, as if the subject interested him idly. "You said he brought a crate of books. They are in his room," she said almost crossly, as if he were accusing her of a mess. "He said they must not be damp. He made me put paper on the shelf first, so they would not be marked." "Shall we see?" She led him up the narrow stairs that carried other people's smells, with a loyalty he always found touching. Polish, the ghost of old dinners, a man's hair lotion. The door to the room was open. It was very tidy. The bed had been made with a precision that spoke of either a boarding-house childhood or a man trying to make an impression. On the small table by the window lay a pair of spectacles and a leather case, and beside them a little bottle of liniment. He picked it up, unscrewed the cap, and smelled the winter in it. Camphor and something sharp. He set it down. The crate stood by the wardrobe, already opened. The books were a narrow kind of reading: railway timetables, an atlas with a broken spine, a dozen volumes of a geographical series, all with his name written in a thin, prissy hand on the flyleaf. Alfred. Duroc. There were also notebooks tied with string labelled with dates that meant nothing, yet he travelled. Maigret asked. He talked about travelling, she said with a curl of the lip. He made journeys with his finger on the map. He liked to think he would go somewhere and never did. He was that sort of man. He drank the last of the anisette last night and talked about China. Did he quarrel with you? The question came out so simply that she did not bristle at it. She looked at him steadily, and for the first time there was something like fatigue in her face. No, we did not quarrel. He was polite. He was always polite. It is worse sometimes, the ones who are polite. You do not know what they want. He went to the window and looked down at the garden, at the small moving shapes. Lucas, Lognon, the doctor who had covered the face at last. From up here, the end of the path looked very far away, as if it belonged to another address. The back gate was only a rectangle of darker wood in a wall the colour of wet stone. He asked to see the wardrobe. Inside, there was the smell of mothballs, dense and solid, a smell that didn't belong to this damp day. The clothes were hung close together, his things nestling against someone else's winter coats. On the shelf was a folded blanket, and beneath it a little cardboard box containing old photographs, a woman with a kind mouth who must have been the dead sister, two men on a jetty somewhere, hat brims tilted just so, a dog that might have been called Mador, for all dogs in such photographs were called that. He touched nothing more. On the table again he paused by the spectacles. He looked at their hinges, very clean, as if recently polished. A vain man, perhaps, or a man with time to make a ritual of small objects. The bottle of liniment had left a ring on the wood where it had stood too long in one place, and when he lifted it again the ring remained. A pale circle insisting that something had been there, and might be again. Downstairs the clock struck in the offensive way it had, a tick that liked to hear itself. He went back down the stairs very slowly, as if descending into a mood, and found that the house had settled into a new hush that comes when grief is ready to be explained. "Your husband will be home tonight," he said simply. "When he arrives, we'll speak. Until then, try not to think of the garden." She gave a short laugh that wasn't laughter. "The garden belongs to the house," she said. "There is no way not to think of it." He took his hat from the peg and looked at it, without putting it on. He told Lucas to keep the back lane under a constable's eye until the cart came for the body. He told Lognon nothing because Lognon would think it anyway. He did not go back to the dead man. He stood at the kitchen door and listened. There was the rain, a little finer now, as if it had been rubbed between two fingers. There was the faint tinkle of a bicycle bell from the lane. There was even, very far away, the whistle of a kettle from a house that had nothing to do with this one. "Chief?" Lucas said softly beside him. "We'll wait," Maigret said. He was not ready to decide what had happened. It was too early in the day for decisions. He would let the house and the people in it breathe their damp quiet into him until something in the pattern shifted of its own accord. People often told on themselves when asked nothing at all. He had learned that long ago, on a morning not so different from this, when the rain had made the city gentle and guilty at once. He went out into the small covered part of the yard and leaned against the wall where the ivy did not grow, lit his pipe, and let it go out again. He found he was thinking of Louise's remark about a brother-in-law, told over bread and the hum of the radio, how it had not seemed to him a thing and now was. He thought of spectacles on a table, a bottle of liniment, shoes with a single bead, of water, a gate that had forgotten to be locked. He thought above all of the neatness. People tried to fold death as if it were a shirt, but it never lay flat. He would wait for the husband. He would wait for the baker's boy to come again and forget himself in chatter. He would wait for the neighbor with the coal to say a word too much. He would wait for the rain to stop, because on such days when it stopped, the city always exhaled something it had been holding, and perhaps when it did he would smell in that breath whether the garden belonged to the house after all, or to someone who had only pretended for a moment to belong. The rain did not stop, but it grew thin enough that the drops no longer broke apart in the air. They fell straight, threading the surface of the garden path. Maigret stayed in the covered corner, pipe between his teeth though it remained unlit, his eyes following the small movements in the yard without seeming to. Lucas was speaking quietly to the constable by the back gate, and from the lane came the occasional muffled footstep of someone passing who had no reason to glance in. He heard the soft clatter of crockery from the kitchen and knew Madame Duroc was busying herself with some task. It was the sort of activity people reached for when they needed the sound of their own movements to fill the silence. He wondered if she was the kind who could sit still when there was nothing useful to do. The doctor came through the garden again, his hat back on his head now, his shoulders hunched more against the air than against the rain. He did not stop to speak, but gave a brief nod that meant his work here was done for now. Maigret knew he would have his report later, with careful words that left room for doubt. When the cart arrived to take the body, Maigret did not go to watch. He preferred not to be present for the moment when the scene shifted from being a place where a man had died to being merely a damp corner of a garden again. Instead, he moved into the kitchen, where Madame Duroc was indeed at the sink, her hands in soapy water, her shoulders tight beneath her dress. "Your husband," Maigret said. "Does he know his brother was here?" She turned her head just enough to glance at him. "Yes. I wrote to him when Alfred arrived. He did not reply to the letter, but then he seldom writes. He's in Le Havre on business, you said. Does he stay there often?" "Only when the work keeps him. This time it was the consignment for the firm's new client. He is a methodical man. When he leaves things in order." Maigret nodded faintly. "Like his brother?" Her hands stilled in the water for a second, then moved again. "Not at all like Alfred. My husband has no time for daydreams." The small distinction sat in Maigret's mind. He let it remain there, not forcing it into shape. He asked to see the telegram she had sent. She dried her hands, went to the drawer, by the telephone, and took out a slip of paper, creased and slightly damp at one corner. It was brief. "Alfred dead, stop police here. Stop return as soon as possible." Nothing more, no term of endearment, no effort at softening. She had sent it as one might inform a colleague of a mishap. "When did you send this?" "An hour ago, just after they came for him." "And before that, you told no one?" There was no one to tell. She said it without emotion, but Maigret caught the trace of something colder beneath, not sadness, but the absence of it. He left her to her washing up and stepped into the narrow hall, where the light was dim even in daytime. The door to the front room was ajar. He went in, not for a search, but to let his eyes adjust to the atmosphere. A piano stood against the wall, its keys hidden under a lace cover. There was a faint smell of dust, as though the room was more for show than for use. The chairs were positioned in a way that discouraged conversation. On the mantel were two photographs, one of a man and woman on a seafront promenade, both dressed too warmly for the season, and another of a young boy in a sailor suit, the kind given to children in studios where they were told to hold still. Lucas appeared in the doorway. "The neighbor with the coal chief. He says he saw Alfred in the lane once or twice speaking to a man with a bicycle. Says it was in the last 2 days." "What sort of man?" Lucas shrugged. "Thin, pale, about 40. Wore a cap." "Could be anyone. Did our neighbor say what they spoke about?" "No, he says he couldn't hear." Maigret's gaze moved back to the photograph of the boy. "Keep your ear to that lane. People remember more when they've told their first version." Lucas nodded and went out again. The light through the lace curtains had shifted, becoming grayer. Maigret found himself thinking of the crate of books upstairs, the notebooks tied with string. A man who had spent his life traveling with his finger might also have spent it writing down where he had been in his mind. It was a habit that sometimes preserved more truth than a journey itself. He returned upstairs without announcing himself. The room was exactly as before, though the spectacles on the table caught the dim light differently now, their lenses clouded slightly with the cool air. He untied the string around one of the notebooks. The handwriting was small, exact, and dated carefully at the top of each page. The entries were not diaries in the usual sense. No weather, no meals, no domestic trifles. They were lists, stations, street names, hotels. Sometimes a single line, Madame M, 17 Rue des Écoles, cordial. Others were curt in another way, refused, closed, absent. The earliest notebook was from 15 years ago. The last, only 2 months old. Each one was ordered as neatly as a railway schedule. In the most recent, Maigret saw the name of a café in the 19th arrondissement, written twice, on 2 different days. The name meant nothing to him yet, but the repetition caught his attention. He closed the book, retied the string, and replaced it in the crate. Before leaving the room, he stood again at the window, looking down at the strip of garden and the back gate. The ivy shook once more, but this time it was from a gust of wind, not movement. The rain was easing, leaving a gloss on the path. Downstairs, Madame Duroc was speaking in a lower voice to someone at the door. When Maigret stepped into the hall, he saw a boy of about 15 holding a basket. The smell of fresh bread rose from it. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting to Maigret, then away. "This is the baker's boy," Madame Duroc said, almost reluctantly. Maigret nodded. "Are you come here every morning?" The boy swallowed. "Most mornings. Sometimes in the afternoon, too, if there's something extra. Today, Madame said there was nothing to bring, but I came to see—" He stopped, glancing at her as if unsure whether to continue. "To see what?" Maigret asked gently. "I saw the man in the garden yesterday," the boy said in a rush. "He was talking to someone at the back gate. I thought maybe they knew each other, but they didn't look friendly." "Who was the other man?" "I don't know him. He had a bicycle, I think. He had one hand on the gate like he was going to come in but didn't. They were talking low, but—" He hesitated again. The man with the bicycle kept looking over his shoulder. Madame Duroc's lips pressed together. "I told you to bring the bread, not stories." Maigret's eyes stayed on the boy. "Would you know him again if you saw him?" The boy nodded quickly. Maigret handed him a coin, not as payment, but as a way of ending the moment without formality. "Go on, and keep your eyes open." When the door closed, the kitchen seemed even smaller, the smell of bread lingering in the air. Madame Duroc went back to her dishes without a word. Maigret stepped outside once more, lighting his pipe this time. The back lane was quiet, but in his mind he could see the scene described by the boy. A man at the gate, a bicycle at his side, a conversation carried in low voices, one of them glancing back as though to see whether the rain had brought anyone else out. He thought of the unlocked gate, the dry shoes, the neatness of the body. Whatever had been said at that gate, it had not been the sort of talk that ended with a handshake. Somewhere, perhaps in that café whose name appeared twice in a notebook, there was a link between the quiet man who travelled on paper and the one who had come to meet him in the rain. And Maigret, who preferred to wait rather than chase, knew the next step would be to let that link come to him, piece by piece, until it could no longer help but show itself. For now, he would wait for the husband, whose arrival would put a new weight on the air of the house, and perhaps make the silence speak a little sooner. The afternoon deepened into that muted grey particular to Paris, when the rain has been falling all day, draining the light without fully darkening the streets. Maigret stayed in the lane for a while, his back to the wall, drawing on his pipe and letting the smoke drift in front of him. From here, the rear gate of the Duroc property looked unremarkable, a rectangle of weathered wood, its latch dull with age. If he had not known there was a garden beyond, he might have taken it for the door of a shed. A woman from 2 houses down came by with a folded umbrella under her arm, her head bent against the mist. She gave him the sidelong glance, Parisians, reserved for policemen, a mixture of curiosity and caution. He nodded politely, offering nothing. He preferred her to keep wondering. Lucas joined him, rubbing his hands together briskly. "No one in the lane just now," he reported. "The neighbor says the man with the bicycle sometimes came at odd hours, evening even, but he's never seen him come through the gate, always just talking there." Maigret let out a slow breath. "Talking how?" Lucas shrugged. "Short words. The neighbor says he never caught more than one at a time, money, name, time, always with pauses between." That fitted with the boy's impression. Not friendly, not exactly an argument, but an exchange that carried its own tension. Maigret considered whether it had been arranged or accidental. Men with bicycles don't always stop to talk to strangers in the rain. He left Lucas with instructions to stay in the lane until dusk and return to the house. Inside, the warmth was almost oppressive after the damp air. Madame Duroc had put on the stove. The smell of onions softened in butter hung low in the kitchen. She did not look up when he entered, continuing to slice bread into thick, uniform pieces. "Your husband will be here by what time?" he asked. She kept her eyes on the bread. "If the trains run without delay, by 8. He dislikes to eat late." "Has he been to Le Havre often these last months?" "Twice. This time for longer. The new client is important." She glanced at him then, as if weighing whether to add something, but decided against it. "Did Alfred receive visitors here? Apart from the man with the bicycle, I never saw any." "Alfred didn't have visitors, he didn't seek them." Maigret studied her for a moment, her face calm but not relaxed, her knife slicing with just a fraction too much force. "And yet someone spoke to him at the gate. Twice, perhaps more." Her hand paused for only the briefest moment before she resumed cutting. "People speak to each other in the street, Inspector. It doesn't mean anything." He didn't argue. Instead, he said, "May I wait here until your husband arrives?" She gave a small shrug. "If you wish. There is little to see." He took the chair by the kitchen window, his eyes on the garden. The path glistened in the dimming light, the ivy on the far wall almost black now. Somewhere beyond, a tram's bell sounded faintly, a note that seemed to come from another part of the city entirely, untouched by this damp pocket of quiet. For nearly an hour, nothing happened. The constable at the back gate was a still figure against the lane. The kitchen settled into its domestic rhythm, the quiet scrape of a knife, the ticking of the clock, the occasional sigh from Madame Duroc, as though her breath carried more weight than she liked to admit. At 7:30, the sound of an engine stopping outside broke the stillness. Heavy footsteps approached the front door, and a key turned in the lock with a deliberate twist. A man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, with a weather-beaten face, and the kind of dark moustache that seemed to cut his expression in half. His eyes flicked from Maigret to his wife without surprise. "Inspector," he said in a voice that was deep but controlled, "I had your telegram. What's happened to Alfred?" Maigret rose, but did not step forward. "He was found dead this morning at the end of your garden path." Duroc's gaze did not shift. "How?" "The doctor is not certain yet. Possibly his heart. Possibly something else." For the first time, a faint line appeared between the man's brows. "Something else? We will know more after the examination." Duroc took off his coat and hung it on the rack with a care that was almost ceremonial. "I see. My wife is not given to melodrama, Inspector, so I assume there is a reason you are here still." "There are some questions," Maigret said, "about Alfred's time here, who he knew, who might have come to see him." Duroc's glance at his wife was brief but heavy with meaning. She looked down at the breadboard. "Alfred was difficult," Duroc said at last. "He lived in his head more than in the world. My sister's death unsettled him, so I told him to stay here until he decided what to do. He could not be left alone. Did he go out?" "Only to the corner shop, sometimes for the paper. Otherwise he stayed in the garden or upstairs with those books of his." "And yet," Maigret said, "he was seen speaking to a man at your back gate. More than once." Duroc's eyes narrowed slightly. "A man with a bicycle?" "Yes. I saw him once. Passing, I thought. Alfred told me he was someone asking the way. I didn't think about it again. There was no shift in the man's tone, but Maigret had learned to listen not only to the words but to the absence of hesitation. Here there was just a fraction too much space before the reply, like a man stepping over an unexpected stone. Would you know this man again? I doubt it. Pale. Ordinary. It was the same description the neighbor had given, and it told. Maigret nothing except that they were both content to keep the man indistinct. Duroc moved toward the stove, lifted the lid on a pot, and replaced it. Alfred had no enemies, Inspector. Only habits. If something happened to him, it was chance, bad luck. Maigret tamped the tobacco in his pipe, his eyes on the man's large, capable hands. Sometimes bad luck begins with a conversation, he said quietly. Duroc looked at him directly then, but only for a moment. We'll help you in any way we can, but I should like to eat now. It's been a long day. Maigret inclined his head. Of course, I'll be back tomorrow morning. Outside, the rain had stopped at last, though the street shone with its memory. He walked slowly to the corner, where Lucas was waiting under a lamp. Well? Lucas asked. He's a man who keeps order, Maigret said, and his brother disturbed it. They walked on in silence for a few steps, the sound of their shoes loud on the wet pavement. Then Maigret added, Find that cafe in the notebook, the one he wrote down twice. Start there in the morning. Lucas nodded, understanding without further explanation. Maigret paused before getting into the car, looking back toward the dark shape of the Duroc house. The garden lay hidden behind it now, the end of the path invisible, but he could still see it in his mind, the wall, the ivy, the latch on the gate, and he could imagine, as Alfred might have, the horizon beyond. Only Alfred's horizon had brought someone to the gate in the rain, and now Alfred was gone. What remained was the space where that meeting had happened, and the certainty that whatever passed between them was not finished yet. The night had wrung the rain out of itself, and morning came with a sky the color of dishwater and a thin light that made the boulevard Richard Lenoir look longer than usual. Maigret woke early anyway. Sleep, when it came, had been a line of small pools, never long enough to gather into a lake. He lay for a minute listening to Louise move about the kitchen, to the soft clink of crockery, and the quiet cough the stove made when coaxed to life. He found her standing at the sink with her sleeves rolled, the radio very low, a smell of coffee. Stitched into the steam, she looked over her shoulder at him, not surprised to see him dressed so soon. You were frowning, she said, by way of good morning. Was I? You do it when you're thinking about people who have done something foolish. She set his cup on the table and sat opposite him, a small basket of rolls between them under a folded cloth. The brother-in-law. He nodded. He didn't tell her about the dry shoes or the bead of water like a marble. He didn't have to. She had a way of arriving at the necessary detail without ever having visited the place. She buttered a roll, not looking up. Men who live inside their heads like to stand at the ends of things, she said. Jetties, bridges, garden paths. It makes them feel as if they could go on if they wished. And men who keep order. They like gates that latch. She glanced at him now, almost smiling. Do you know what I don't like? The smell of a cupboard in a room where someone has only just arrived. It means they unpacked before they decided whether to stay. He let that sit between them. He thought of the mothballs and the spectacles and the notebooks tied in string. He thought of the bottle of liniment leaving its pale ring, an object that had already taken possession. Serve a piece of furniture. She poured him more coffee. If the man with the bicycle came to the back gate, she added, as if remembering a non-essential item on a list. He didn't come to be seen by the neighbors in front. People who don't come to the front have something to ask that doesn't fit the front door. Money, perhaps, or a favor that isn't one. He grunted, not in disagreement but in acknowledgement. Louise's remarks were like the little pins a dressmaker uses, pricks of clarity that hold the cloth in place while the figure takes shape. He left earlier than usual, coat collar up, pipe in his pocket as if it were a companion rather than a habit. At the quay the building smelled of wet wool and ink. Lucas was waiting with a note in his hand. The cafe, he said. It's called Le Puy Bleu, Rue Armand Carrel near the canal. Opens at 7. I telephoned and asked a fool's question. About matches. The patron sounded half asleep. Good, Maigret said. Let him be half asleep when we arrive. They took the car as far as the canal and walked the last street. The air there felt colder, as if the water kept a different season. Le Puy Bleu had one of those blue enamel signs above the door that promised more cheer than the room held. Inside, a zinc counter ran the length of the wall, a few small tables in a line like well-behaved children. The patron was a broad man, with a soft face that looked as though it preferred to smile but had learned not to. He was wiping a glass with a cloth that had been clean once. "Tisane? Coffee?" he offered automatically, then saw the two men for what they were and changed nothing in his tone. "What can I get you?" "Coffee," Maigret said. He sat near the window where the light from the canal diluted itself on the tabletop. He didn't take his hat off. "We're looking for a man who comes sometimes with a bicycle, pale, about 40. He talks at the back of a house on Rue." He left the number unsaid. If the man knew, he would fill it in. "Armand Carrel," the patron said anyway without surprise. "There are many men with bicycles on Armand Carrel." "This one speaks without coming in," Lucas put in, his voice easy, as if he were only making conversation to pass a minute. "He keeps one hand on the gate as if the gate might bite." The patron's cloth kept moving. "I have customers who keep one hand on their money." "Perhaps it's the same hand," Maigret said. A woman emerged from the back with a basket of sugar cubes, her apron neat, her hair pinned tight. She gave the policeman a look that was neither friendly nor hostile. It simply measured how long they would occupy the table nearest the light. The patron put down their cups and, with a little sigh, as if he were giving up something private, said, "There's a fellow who comes early. Sometimes he leaves the bicycle out front. Sometimes he leans it against the side. Cap pulled down. I don't know his name." "Does he meet anyone here?" "He meets no one. He looks at people's hands." The patron shaped his own hands as if holding an invisible cup. "He notices if someone brings their purse to the counter with them or leaves it on a table. He's the kind who knows the sound of coins in a pocket by the weight." "Has he been these last days?" "Yesterday, no. The day before, yes." "Time? Before 8? Did he speak to an older man? White hair, neat coat?" The patron considered. "An older man came twice, quiet. Stood near the counter with a glass of anisette he didn't drink. He watched the door, not the people. He could have been waiting." "Did they speak? Here?" "No." The patron shook his head, then, after a pause, conceded, "Not inside. Outside." He made a small gesture toward the canal, the gesture of a man indicating the weather. "I don't stand in rain to listen to other men's talk." "You remember everything else," Maigret said mildly. "I remember my counter," the patron said, but this time his mouth gave away the hint of a smile it had been taught to suppress. The woman with the sugar basket went back through the curtain. Maigret looked at the streaks of light on the zinc, at the dregs of someone else's coffee in a cup 2 tables over, at a newspaper folded to the racing page. He drank half his own cup and let the bitterness sit on his tongue. "His hands," he said, more to the air than to the patron. "Thin? Nails clean?" "Chewed," the patron said. "Like a man who waits for things that don't come on time. They left with a promise to return and no threat attached to it." On the pavement, the canal moved under its skin of colorless light, and a barge nudged the quay with the care of a polite guest. "What do you think?" Lucas asked. "That our cyclist has been measuring distances," Maigret said. "Pockets to doors. Gates to lanes, the space between a garden and a horizon that isn't there." He tucked his chin into his scarf. "Find me a name. Ask at the bicycle shop on the corner. Men who chew their nails don't fix their chains. They pay someone to do it and complain about the price." Lucas peeled away obligingly. Maigret did not go back to the quay at once. He turned instead into a street where laundry strung between windows made low banners against the pale day. He found a tobacconist who knew who bought matches 2 at a time and who bought tobacco by the week. He asked for nothing and received the customary shrug when he said "pale man cap," and thanked the woman anyway, because habit is also a kind of information. By late morning he was back at the house on Armand Carrel. The kitchen smelled of leeks now. A pot simmered with its lid tilted as if to hear better. Madame Duroc was ironing at the table, the iron moving in slow, even arcs, her face looking younger in the steam. "Did your husband sleep?" Maigret asked. "Like a man who has accounts to settle in the morning," she said. "He has gone to the firm. He will be back at noon." "Alfred's notebooks," he said. "Did you read them?" She shook her head, not as a denial but as refusal. "He kept his little world tied up with string. Perhaps it is better that way." He wrote down the name of a cafe, Twice. She didn't look up. He collected names like people collect postcards. They make a stack and then don't know where to put it. He stood a moment, listening to the iron's soft exhale. The man with the bicycle. Was he here yesterday? Perhaps. The iron paused, then continued. There are men and there is rain. If the rain falls, it is the rain you remember. And if money moves? She set the iron upright and looked at him at last. You think Alfred had money? He had a small pension and bigger ideas. He liked to imagine a situation where two men meet, and one has something the other wants. What did he have? Her gaze slid past him to the window, where the strip of garden was still damp but no longer shining. He had his brother's address. They left that where it lay. The back gate gave a delicate clack as the constable shifted his weight outside. Somewhere in the house, the clock decided to strike 11 and then, as if apologizing, struck again more softly. The front door opened and closed. Duroc came in with a ledger under his arm and a draught of cold air around him. He nodded to Maigret without warmth, kissed his wife mechanically, set the ledger on the dresser, as a man would put down a burden he intends to take up again at once. I've told the firm, he said. They send their condolences. Generous, Maigret said. Duroc shrugged. They are a firm, not a church. His eyes flicked to the iron on the table, to the pot on the stove. You are still here? For a little. Maigret let his attention wander apparently to the rim of his pipe. Your back gate, Monsieur Duroc. It stays unlocked often? It should be locked, Duroc said at once, and then, after the smallest delay, my wife forgets. I forget nothing, she said quietly, her eyes on the cloth she was smoothing with her hand. You leave it open for the coal, then you forget to close it. Duroc's jaw worked once. It is a lane, he said. Neighbors use it. And men with bicycles, Maigret said. Duroc's eyes came to him with a new sharpness. You have found him? We have not lost him, Maigret replied. Tell me, did Alfred ever ask you for money? For himself, no. He was proud. For something else, someone else, yes. Duroc's face changed in a way that wasn't anger but had anger in it. He had a way of believing he could help. He couldn't. Someone else, Maigret repeated. A girl once, Duroc said dismissively, years ago. Then it was a man he'd met in a cafe who needed to get to Antwerp for work. There is always someone. Alfred collects unfortunate people like others collect stamps. Most of them never arrive at the address he imagines for them. And this time, Duroc said, I told him no. It wasn't quite an admission and not quite a defense. It lay between the two, like a coin on a table farther from one hand than the other. Did he quarrel? With me? Duroc shook his head. Alfred didn't quarrel. He sighed. He went to the end of the garden path and looked at the wall. He met a man at your gate, Maigret said. A man who chews his nails and watches hands. My wife tells you stories, Duroc said shortly. Your neighbor tells me stories. So does the baker's boy. Your wife says almost nothing at all. He looked at the man without animosity. When men come to back gates, they are not there to admire the ivy. The pot on the stove gave a soft, hopeful bubble, as if the soup wished to be consulted. No one moved. Duroc's shoulders lifted and fell once. If you think Alfred was caught in some piece of foolishness, he said at last, you're probably right. He sounded tired suddenly, as if speaking the words had loosened something heavy inside. But he had little to lose, Inspector. He lived on air. Air becomes water in the rain, Maigret said, and saw in the man's eyes the irritability of someone who dislikes metaphors before midday. Lucas appeared in the doorway, damp about the edges. Chief, he said, the bicycle shop at the corner, there's a man called Vernier who comes in with a frame too big for him and never enough money to pay. Pale. Nails like a boy. The owner says he does small errands. He also says if a parcel needs to pass from one hand to another without paperwork, Vernier knows which hand and how. Does he know where he sleeps? In a room above the locksmith's on Rue de Nantes. The locksmith says he pays late, not never. Duroc had turned slightly, as if the name Vernier had weight enough to tug at his sleeve. He did not speak. Thank you, Maigret said to Lucas, as if they were discussing the weather. To Duroc he added, if Vernier is the man at your gate, he will have left his teeth in something. Men who chew are always biting at the day. He did not make a show of leaving. He put on his hat, nodded to the woman at the iron, who returned the nod without lifting her eyes, and went out through the hall that still carried the faint, chilly breath of the opened door. In the lane, the gate looked ordinary again, patient and unimportant. The constable tapped his boot on a stone to knock off a clot of dried mud, and the sound was very small. "Rue de Nantes," Maigret said, and Lucas fell into step beside him. They didn't speak for a block. The city had resumed its noise, but around them, it was as if someone had turned the volume down a notch. A barrow creaked. A woman laughed once. Somewhere behind a closed shutter, a radio sang a tune about a girl waiting by a river. "What are we going to say to Vernier?" Lucas asked at last. "Nothing," Maigret said. "We'll let him do the speaking. He will think we know more than we do and offer to fill the gaps. If he is the gate, he has also been the messenger. Messengers like to be important. They like to be asked for the time twice in the same morning." They turned onto Rue de Nantes, where the locksmith's sign hung like a key too big for any door. Above it, a cracked window showed a thin curtain that had been washed too many times. Maigret paused on the step, listening. He could hear a man moving inside with a care that belonged to someone who has learned not to jar a thing for fear it will break. He felt, the way a fisherman feels a change in the line, that the day had tugged. It wasn't a revelation. It was only that the pattern had shifted by a thread. The locksmith's bell made a thin sound, like a coin dropped on a plate, and a smell of metal shavings drifted out to meet them. The shop itself was empty. A tray of blanks lay on the counter, each key like a small tongue waiting to be shaped. From the back came the scrape of a stool, and a voice that said, "1 moment," in a way that meant more than a moment would pass. Maigret didn't mind. Waiting is a way of learning a room. Lucas lifted a latch and glanced up the narrow stair that led to the rooms above. The treads had a rubbed shine in the center, the shine that belongs to a single man going up and down, without much to carry. After a time, the locksmith appeared, an old man with a magnifying lens still perched over one eye, giving him a look of surprised concentration. He took in the two figures without alarm. Policemen were like rain to him, an inconvenience that dried by itself. "We're looking for a lodger of yours," Maigret said mildly. "Vernier." The lens slipped up onto the old man's forehead. "If you take him, tell him to leave the key. He won't, he'll take it. And then I'll have to make another and charge the next fellow twice." "Is he upstairs?" "If he's honest, he is," the locksmith said. And then, as if remembering he should not be funny with authority, added, "He sleeps late, works at odd hours." Maigret thanked him and started up the stairs. On the landing, a rectangle of pale light fell from a window that had never learned to be clean. Beyond, a door stood ajar just enough to show that it had been pushed closed, without conviction. He tapped the wood with one knuckle and waited. Inside there was the small scuffle of a chair, and a voice that tried to make itself rougher than it was said. "Who's that?" "Post," Lucas answered quietly. The door opened on a chain, and a long face with eyes too quick for calm peered out. The man saw two hats and tried to close the door at once, but Maigret had already put his hand against the jamb in a way that was not forceful and not negotiable either. Vernier stepped back, fingers fluttering near the chain, as if wondering whether his nails would hold. He was paler than described, with a cap on his head though he was indoors, as if the cap made him into someone who might leave at any moment. The room smelled of damp wool and bread crusts. There was a bicycle in the corner with a frame a size too proud for him, its front wheel turned toward the door like a dog that has been told to stay. "Don't be frightened," Maigret said, and it was almost true. "We'll have a word and be gone." "What about?" Vernier asked, but his eyes skittered to the bicycle and then to a coat slung over a chair, and then to a small table where a cup had left 3 concentric stains, like a man who forgets to use a saucer and remembers too late. "You were seen at a certain back gate in Rue Armand-Carrel," Lucas said, in the tone one uses to remark the weather. "Speaking with an older gentleman, these last days." "People have gates," Vernier said, as if making a philosophical point. "You can't stop a man leaning against one to rest." "You lean with one hand," Maigret said. "You keep the other for whatever may come." Vernier's mouth moved, in a way that could have been a smile in other circumstances. "What do you want from me?" "A name," Maigret said. "Perhaps 2. and a story that matches its shoes with the mud." The man's gaze slid again to the bicycle. His hands, which had nowhere to go, went to his pockets and found nothing there either. He took off his cap, as if remembering he had manners, and his ears came free, the left one nicked in a way that suggested a boyhood accident rather than a fight. "I'm not in trouble," he tried. "That's a sentence men make when they are," Maigret said, not unkindly. "Sit down." The chair creaked under Vernier's narrow weight. Lucas did not sit. He wandered as if aimlessly to the table, looked without peering at the objects there. A pile of small receipts, a pencil chewed to twice its length in splinters, a pawn ticket folded so many times it had become soft. He did not touch it. Maigret didn't ask for it. He let the pawn ticket be a fact that belonged to the heir. "The older man was named Alfred Duroc," Maigret said. "He is dead. Suddenly. He met you at the gate." Vernier blinked. Something in him fell a step down a stair and steadied. "Dead?" "This morning in the garden." "I didn't—" Vernier began and then clamped his mouth shut, as if he had heard himself step forward too quickly. His eyes had the look of someone who listens for footsteps on a staircase. "He asked me the way, twice. He said he liked to walk in the rain. He said he liked the smell. Some people are like that." He spread his hands and the nails were indeed gnawed low, the skin around them raw and shiny. He was polite. "People like that don't die in gardens with nothing to say." "They do," Maigret said. "More often than you think." He filled his pipe as if the subject were not the subject. What did he want, if not the way? Vernier's eyes went to the pawn ticket again and then away. "A letter," he said at last, with the unhappy bravery of someone pulling his own tooth. "I take letters sometimes when a man doesn't want to trust the post. It's a little thing. It keeps me in bread. For whom?" "For whoever asks," Vernier said quickly. "This time a man at the cafe. He said an older gentleman would meet me at a gate, and I was to bring what he gave me the day after, same place, unless he changed it. He didn't change it, the E. Café Bain le Puy Bleu." Vernier nodded, surprised and not surprised. "He said not to come in, he would be by the door." "What did you bring?" Vernier lifted his cap and put it on again, as if the movement could cover the words. "A small packet in brown paper. Light. Money, I thought, but money is heavier than that. It felt like—" He rubbed two fingers together delicately, and in that motion there was a knowledge that didn't belong to someone who only delivered bread. "Keys," he said, "or a key, not a house key, flat and cut shallow." "To give to whom?" "To the old man," Vernier said. "He was to give me something in return for the one who sent me." I didn't see it. He kept his hand. Closed on it, he had a dignified way with his hands. "A pawn ticket?" Lucas asked softly, and the man flinched in the direction of the small folded square, as if Lucas had reached across the room and tugged at his sleeve. "It's mine," Vernier said quickly. "It's for the bicycle when the rent is due." "You don't pawn a bicycle for a day," Lucas observed, without making it a challenge. "It keeps the landlady seeing me. She forgets if I owe her, if she has a ticket in her head instead." He swallowed. "The old man—" They kept it quiet. "The man at the cafe said the old man had something that didn't belong to him." "What man at the cafe?" Vernier considered a lie and found it heavy. "He told me to call him Monsieur Paul. Everyone is someone else in those places in the morning. He's about—" He lifted a hand to his own forehead, as if height could be measured like fever. "Your size, a better coat. He speaks like a clerk, who has decided not to be a clerk any longer. And he gave you what you say was a key," Maigret said. "What did he want in exchange?" "Paper," Vernier said after a small pause. "Paper that proved a thing. He didn't say what. I don't ask. I don't read except names. If there's a name, I say it to myself and forget it." "And the old man gave you something?" Vernier's hand moved in the air uncertainly, as if trying to recall the shape of an object in the dark. He pressed it into my palm and said, "Tell Monsieur Paul it is enough." And he said, "Tell him it is clean," as if there was a way to dirty paper without touching it. I took it back to the cafe. Monsieur Paul didn't come in. He took it at the door and didn't look at it there. He put it away as if he had already seen it in his mind. "Which day?" "Yesterday morning," Vernier said. "Early. It was raining." He was impatient. The sort of impatient that makes you think he has promised a thing and now must keep his promise before it turns on him. "And this morning?" Maigret asked. "You were to take something again?" "No." Vernier shook his head, quick. He said it was finished. He said if I saw the old man again, I was to say nothing at all. I like to say nothing. It suits me. There was no bravado in him. There was only the thin pride of a man who has learned to live by taking up little space. Maigret looked at the bicycle again, the frame leaning like a question. He was thinking of a key that was not a house key, of a paper that was clean, of a man called Monsieur Paul who kept to doors. He was thinking, too, of Alfred's notebooks, the precise lists of places and people that were not journeys and yet went somewhere. "What did the key look like?" he asked. "Flat, you said. Brass." "Dark," Vernier said. "Black almost, with a number pressed into it. A metal that doesn't take a polish. I've seen one like it at the station. For lockers." Lucas's eyes met Maigret's, and then moved away to the window. A station locker key, a paper from a locker, clean. A man who is not a clerk any longer. An older man who collects addresses as if they could become destinations. "Which station?" "Gare de l'Est," Vernier said, with the certainty of someone who counts his errands by the bridges, near the tobacconist where they sell the peppermints that look like little bells. "And Monsieur Paul? Will he be at the cafe again?" "He said not today. He said if anything went wrong I'd know it because I wouldn't know anything." Vernier gave a small apologetic smile, the kind a waiter gives when the kitchen has run out of something one has already ordered. "Things going wrong look like silence to me. I prefer noise." "Did Alfred look afraid?" Maigret asked, and there was nothing of the policeman in the way he said it. It was the question of a man asking after another's last hour. Vernier considered. He looked as if he had remembered something he used to know by heart, and was surprised to find it just where he left it. He had a careful way of standing, like a man who doesn't like to disturb the ground. "Thank you," Maigret said. He meant it. He stood and the room seemed to tilt for a moment, the way rooms do when more has been said in them than they were built to hold. "If Monsieur Paul speaks to you again, you will tell me, and you will keep your hands out of other men's gates." Vernier nodded in a rush, relief making him clumsy. I didn't—" He stopped. "I carry things, I don't make them heavy." In the street the wind had turned, bringing with it the smell of iron and steam. Maigret lit his pipe and let the smoke sit in his mouth a second before he breathed it out. Lucas walked beside him without speaking until they reached the corner. "A station locker," Lucas said at last. "Gare de l'Est." Maigret's thoughts moved with the speed of an old dog getting up from a warm spot. A man who travels with his finger and another who doesn't want to be seen with a parcel, paper that is clean, perhaps a document that was once somewhere else and now is here, or proof that something is what someone said it was. "And Alfred in the middle," Lucas said. "And Alfred in the middle," Maigret repeated. He did not hurry his steps. He did not need to. He would stop by the house on Armand Carrel again before the station, not to ask anything, only to see how the air in the rooms had changed with the husband's return and the morning's news. He would let Madame Duroc remark on something that wasn't the matter, and in doing so touch the matter itself. Then he would go to the Gare de l'Est and look at rows of small doors with numbers and think of a key that did not take a polish, and of a paper that, clean or not, would have been folded once and then again until it fit a man's hand. By the time they reached Armand Carrel again, the light had come up just enough to show where it wouldn't go any further. The houses looked rubbed with a grey cloth. Maigret didn't ring. He went in as a man goes into a place where he has already been tolerated once that day and may yet be tolerated again. The kitchen was warm, and Madame Duroc had set the iron aside. She was peeling potatoes into a basin, the peels slipping into the water like ribbons, her hands working without needing to look at them. "Your husband has gone out again?" Maigret asked. She nodded, the knife making its neat, economical arcs. "Back to the firm. They always need something when there is a death, papers, signatures." "Papers," he repeated, not as an echo but as if tasting the word. "Did Alfred ever ask to borrow anything of your husband's for such errands? A bag, perhaps? A briefcase?" She wiped the knife on a cloth. Yesterday he took the old leather case from the hall cupboard, she said, the words coming because they belonged among the peels and had not yet been placed on the pile. The one with the broken lock. He said he would look ridiculous with only his pockets. He went out with it? He came back with it, she said. Empty. He put it back in the cupboard and closed the door gently as if the case might be sleeping. It was nothing, and it was something. He thanked her and did not explain what for. Outside, Lucas was at the back gate with the constable. Their conversation the kind that takes place with eyes rather than mouths. When Maigret appeared, Lucas straightened, his face asking a question he didn't give words to. Gare de l'Est, Maigret said. There's a locker there that has been asked a favor. They went by car as far as the boulevard and then on foot, because stations told you more when you approached them at their own speed. The hall smelled of coffee and steam, and the faint metal smell that clings to the rails and to men who wait beside them. The row of lockers under the clock had the look of a mouth with many small teeth, some of them used, some of them not. He didn't look for a number. He stood a little to one side and watched the man at the desk where keys are signed in and out. He was a tidy man who would have been happy in a bank if there had been a job for him there. He touched each key with the same respect, like a sacristan, laying out vessels. When there was a lull, Maigret stepped forward and set his hat on the counter. The man glanced at it before he glanced at the face. Hats told him things. You have many early customers, Maigret asked, as if admiring a craft he had thought of taking up in another life. People are early everywhere, the man replied, with the disconsolate air of someone who has discovered that there is no hour when one can be alone. This morning, rain makes men restless, older men too. The man's lips compressed, then relaxed. He enjoyed remembering. At 7, a gentleman with a white moustache, very correct, asked for his key to be checked because it would not turn easily. It turned very well. He made it turn as if he was showing it a lesson. Before him, a younger one, cap on, no luggage, fingers like this. He lifted his own hand and nibbled delicately at nothing. Between the two, a woman with a hat that did not belong to the hour. Which lockers? He made a small accusing gesture toward the neat, numbered faces. I cannot say that. You can tell me if the older man needed help, Maigret said. Men who don't need help sometimes ask for it when there is nothing to ask. He did not, the clerk said, and then added, because he could not help himself. He smelled of liniment, winter in a bottle. He put his briefcase on the floor and frowned when it made a mark. Thank you, Maigret said sincerely. He moved away and let his eyes pass across the line of doors in the methodical way a man reads a timetable. Left to right, without hope, but with patience. It wasn't the numbers that told him anything. It was a locker with a trace of brown paper caught in the hinge, a triangle no bigger than a thumbnail softened by damp. He crouched, eased it out, turned it over in his fingers. It had a faint sourness, gum arabic mixed with smoke, and something that belonged in a cupboard where moths are not welcome. He put it to his nose a second time and thought of the little bottle on Alfred's table. Lucas's face did not change, but his breath did. Here, Maigret said. He didn't call for a wrench or for the surety of a receipt with someone's name on it. He looked at the desk again and then went back, lazier than his feet felt. Tell me when the older gentleman returned. His key, he said. Exactly, the man thought, happy to weigh minutes like coins. 7:40, he said at last. He put it down as if the key had been rude. Before the trains to Le Havre? The man looked at him, interested. Now. You can go many places from here, he said, not answering and answering. Maigret let it go. They stood by the station cafe a while, not drinking, watching the way the morning dressed itself on men's faces. A porter with a limp passed, the limp more pronounced today because of the wet. A woman in a poor fur counted the contents of her purse twice, not because the coins might change, but because counting made them obey. Somewhere out of sight, a loud voice declared a delay as if announcing a death. Let's see the tobacconist, Maigret said, and they crossed to the small shop where teens and cards and paper men with pipes smiled from the shelves. The woman, behind the counter, had wrists like a washerwoman, and a way of looking that made it clear she had never been surprised in her life. Peppermints like little bells, Lucas said. She plucked a packet without shifting her eyes. Older gentleman with a moustache, Maigret added, his tone that of a man making up a riddle whose answer he already knew. Liniment, briefcase he treats like a cat he doesn't want to wake. She gave the faintest shrug. There are many moustaches in the morning. A younger man who chews his nails and buys matches 2 at a time. Many nails. But after a moment she reached under the counter and brought up a small heap from the day's sweepings. She did not know why she did it. She liked to show that she kept the floor as clean as her talk. There was a tram ticket expired, a corner of newspaper racing page with ink that had run, and a sliver of an envelope with the printed words still visible in the smudged type, Compagnie des Entrepôts de l'Ouest. Below, a line of smaller words, Havre, Rouen, Nantes. Who dropped that? Lucas asked. Whoever emptied his pockets, without thinking of me, she said equably, and swept everything back into the bin because their attention had made it feel untidy to her. It was nothing you could hold in a report. It was enough to carry in your pocket between 2 fingers, like a coin you keep from putting down too soon. Outside, the wind had lifted. The clouds were moving, not breaking. Maigret felt no desire to rush to Le Havre or to summon trains to obey him. He walked back toward the entrance and telephoned instead, not to the firm, but to the quay, and from there to a man in Le Havre who would not dislike him for calling. He asked very slowly about a consignment due for a new client of a Paris firm, something stored in the warehouses of West, something that might be made to look as if it belonged to one name while in fact belonging to another. He listened to the way the man in Le Havre said, "It happens," which is not the same as "it has happened." When he hung up, he found Lucas watching him with the careful curiosity of someone who does not want to step on an object that might be a line or a fuse. "A consignment?" Lucas said. "A modest one," Maigret said. "Modest enough to make men careless and careful at the same time. There is a paper that proves a box to be this box and not another, or proves that a man who is not the client may take it as if he were. You see how it is." And Alfred, Lucas said, "In the middle." Because he could go to the station without being looked at, because he could stand at the end of the garden and think a wall was a horizon. Because when an older man says a thing is clean, he believes it. He went back to Armand Carrel not because he expected a confession to have grown in the meantime, but because houses exhale something different after one has been away long enough to give them time. The kitchen smelled of potatoes and leek now, the soup having made up its mind. Madame Duroc had a shawl over her shoulders, not because of cold, but because she had reached the hour of the day when a woman takes up a shawl. She glanced at him and then past him to see if he had brought news with him like weather. "Your husband?" he asked. "In his office," she said. "He is counting the same numbers again in case they change." "I'll not disturb him," he said and meant it. He stood instead by the window and looked at the garden. Without the rain, the path had taken back some of its color. A small bird was hopping in the strip of earth at the edge, naive in its hunger. "Did Alfred ever speak of Le Havre?" he asked without turning his head. "Of the warehouses there?" "He read the names on the sides of lorries like prayers," she said. "He said some names were stronger than others. He liked the ones with rivers. Rouen, Nantes." She paused, and her mouth did that small uncertain movement it had. "He asked me once what I thought a consignment looked like, if it were opened. He said perhaps it was just a smaller kind of house." "And what did you say?" "I told him boxes are boxes," she said, "and that if a man wants a house he should not open a box." He let out a small breath that might have been a laugh. In the hall a door moved, just a whisper, not a slam. He could feel the weight of the husband in the air, the way one feels the weight of a cupboard that has been moved an inch back to, where it belongs. He did not ask to see him yet. Instead, he said to the woman in the gentlest tone he had used all day, "Madame Duroc, when your brother-in-law came back yesterday with the briefcase, did he seem—" He searched for a word that wasn't melodramatic and wasn't empty. "Relieved." "He seemed taller," she said, surprising herself. "He went to the mirror and put on his spectacles and took them off again. He looked at himself like a boy before school, deciding whether he would be the kind of boy who speaks first or the kind who keeps his head down. 'Thank you,' he said, and meant it. He stepped out into the corridor then, not towards the office but towards the small room where Alfred had slept. He stood on the threshold. The spectacles were where he had left them. The little bottle made the same pale ring. On the crate, the notebooks looked patient. He touched nothing. He listened. The house said nothing. It had said what it could in the kitchen. On the way down, he met Duroc in the hall. The man had the ledger again, held against his chest, as if to keep it from being read by the air. "You. Find what you need at your station," Duroc asked, his tone civil and not welcoming. "I found that men who do not like to disturb the ground still leave a mark," Maigret said. "Monsieur, did Alfred take an interest in your work beyond sympathy? Did he know the names of your clients?" "I talk at dinner," Duroc said shortly. "My wife listens. Alfred dreamed. And a new client. Does the name Entrepôt de l'Ouest sing in your head as loudly as it does in mine?" Duroc's eyes moved. Not much, but enough for a man who had trained them not to. "You people see conspiracies because you eat with conspirators," he said. "We move goods. Paper follows goods like a dog follows a cart." "Sometimes the dog goes to the wrong door," Maigret said, not insisting on the metaphor. "If there is a paper missing, you will tell me." "I have already told the firm," Duroc said, and his jaw set, the picture of a man who preferred accounts balanced to talk stretched. Maigret nodded as if that ended it. He put on his hat again and paused at the threshold of the kitchen to say to the woman, "If you remember the shape of the briefcase under his arm, keep it for me. Sometimes the way a thing is carried tells you why it was carried." Outside, the lane had begun to dry in patches, the stone showing through in islands. The constable shifted his weight and pretended he had not been longing for a cigarette. Lucas, who had learned to look as if he had just arrived even when he had been there an hour, came up to Maigret's shoulder. "Well, Le Havre," Maigret said. "But we will not go there to look at ships. We will let Le Havre call us if it wants to. Go to the café again later. See if our Monsieur Paul has the habit of asking for the time. He will want to know whether the day has passed him or whether he still owns a piece of it." And Vernier. "Vernier will keep his room like a rabbit keeps a hole," Maigret said. "If he moves, the locksmith will hear the stair. He will tell us because he likes to complain about keys." He looked up at the sky, which had the color of a bruise, thinking about becoming a sky again. "Something will give. Not from evidence. From someone's patience thinning. It is often the one who thinks he has none to begin with." They walked slowly toward the corner where the tram bell could be heard on clear hours. It was not a clear hour, but the bell sounded anyway, as if time in its way kept better order than men did. Toward late afternoon, the light thinned again, not because of new rain, but in the tired way a day gives up. Le Puy Bleu looked almost cheerful from the pavement, its blue enamel sign taking the little daylight that was left and making something of it. Inside, the patron had put a fresh cloth on one table and set a glass upright on it as if to encourage good manners from the next customer. The zinc counter kept its dull shine. The mirror behind it, which had seen too much of too many faces, offered nothing new. Maigret took the same seat by the window, not because he believed in ritual, but because the chair knew the weight of him, from the morning. Lucas stood for a time by the door, taking in and giving back nothing. The patron gave them their coffee without questions. Questions cost, answers were free, and had to be rationed. It was the woman who came from the back first, the one with the sugar cubes. She set a small plate of them by Maigret's cup, although he never took sugar, an old habit of generosity and of wanting to have placed something between herself and the men who made rooms serious. "Busy?" he asked, because in Paris one says this in cafes when one means something else. "It will be," she said, "when men are deciding whether to go home. They fortify themselves with small things then, so that the big things do not notice." He nodded, as if she had offered the time, and she returned to the curtain with the tranquil air of someone who has done what could be done. It was not quite 6, when a man paused in the doorway with his hand still on the handle, the way people do when they want something either to begin or to end, and haven't decided which. He was not remarkable. If told to think of a clerk and then take away the pen and put a better coat on him, one would arrive at him. He had that careful way of standing that is half apology and half claim. His hat was good but not new, his collar neat. He looked first at the counter and then at the door again, like a man making sure of 2 exits. The patron looked up, did not smile and did not frown. That is to say, he recognized him. The man gave the smallest nod in return and took the table the morning's anisette had occupied. He kept his hands in view. There are men who exhale secrecy. He was not like that. He exhaled caution. Lucas glanced at Maigret and did not wait for instruction. He went to the counter and asked for a newspaper he didn't need. Maigret let his coffee cool. When the patron had retreated and the room had returned to its own breathing, Maigret rose, as if the thought had only just occurred to him, and crossed to the man's table. He did not ask permission to sit, and he did not take offense when none was given. "You are called Monsieur Paul in the mornings," he said, in the tone one uses to remark that the soup smells of leeks. "In the afternoons you are called something else." The man did not start. He only looked at Maigret's hat with a flicker of appreciation one goovies to a well-made tool. "In the afternoons, Inspector," he said. "I try not to be called at all." It wasn't quite insolence, it was the kind of phrase a man rehearses in his head, so often it comes out smooth. He had a soft voice that had learned to say difficult things in rooms where difficult things were done with paper. "You were at the door yesterday," Maigret said. "You spoke to the boy with the bicycle and to an older man. You gave the boy a key. The older man gave you a paper. You have not been inside since." The man's mouth made the shape of a smile without finishing it. "You make a morning sound like a history," he said, "and yet it is not even dinner time." Maigret did not fill the space. He had learned long ago that silence is the only invitation some men respect. Outside, a tram bell sounded and drifted down the canal as if it were water. At last the man said, "If an older gentleman asked me to help him with a formality, and a boy with a bicycle delivered an innocent article to another innocent place, I do not see what interest this has for the police." "Innocent articles are the ones that get lost," Maigret said, "and formality is a cloth stretched over a table where something is done that would look clumsy without it." "You have a way with words," the man said. He looked toward the counter. The patron was polishing a glass with the attention of a surgeon. "I have a way with documents. We are both artisans. If there was a paper, clean, as some say, that passed from one hand to another, it would be because the first hand did not know how to hold it and the second did." "And the third?" Maigret asked. The man's eyes returned to Maigret's face and lingered there. There was a small calculation in them, and behind that, something that was not calculation at all. Fatigue, perhaps, or the knowledge that any road one takes away from a desk ends at another desk. "The third hand," he said finally, "belongs to a name. Names are hands that do not tremble when a warehouse clerk writes in his book. A paper can be clean, and yet belong to no one until a name makes it what it is." "Compagnie des Entrepôts de l'Ouest," Maigret said, as if quoting a poem he had half forgotten. "Le Havre, Rouen, Nantes." The man looked at the sugar on Maigret's saucer, as if deciding whether to commit it to a memory he was trying to keep as small as possible. "They are places," he said. "They have docks, they have stamps." "And stamps leave ink," Maigret said. He put his pipe on the table but did not light it. The older gentleman, he believed he was helping. He liked to stand at the ends of things and imagine other horizons. He had a brother who does not like to imagine. The man's patience shifted, not broken, not even cracked, but like a pane in a frame that has shrunk in dry weather. "If you have questions, Inspector," he said softly, "ask them. Do not tell me about brothers." "What was the name on the paper?" Maigret asked. The man looked at him as a man looks at a door he had not expected to see open. "You can ask that," he said, almost approving. "I cannot answer it." "So you are conscientious," Maigret said. "That must be new." For a moment the man's face showed something that belonged to a younger man, offense almost. It passed. "I have never liked being clever," he said, and perhaps in that sentence there was all one needed to know. "It makes people careless. I am careful. I stood at a door yesterday in the rain and put one thing in a pocket and left, without looking to see whether a policeman was in the mirror. That is care." "And this morning?" Maigret said lightly, as if asking whether the bread was fresh. "I was not here this morning," the man said, and then, because he heard something in his own voice that did not serve him, he added, "There are mornings for coffee and mornings for offices." "Where was your office yesterday afternoon?" Maigret asked. "The one with the stamp." He had not expected an answer to that. He did not get one. The man stood, counted coins on the table with a little precision that had once made his superiors fond of him, and put on his hat. "A man died," he said neutrally, as if mentioning the weather in another city. If you attach him to me, you make a rope you will have to carry. I don't advise ropes in the rain, they drink. He left no mark on the door. Lucas came over at once, the newspaper still folded in his hand, and let out a breath he had held so long it had forgotten it was breath. "Well," he said flatly. "Well," Maigret echoed. He did not say that he liked the man for that last remark, which was the remark of someone who knows about burdens. He finished his coffee because one does. When they stepped back into the street, the air had taken on the cold taste it sometimes has at the corner of a canal. It smelled faintly of iron, and of something sweet from a barge that was loading crates, of fruit no one would eat at home, but would peel with a small knife in a rented room. Lucas's footfalls matched his, the city's matched no one. At the corner a familiar shape detached itself from a doorway, as if misery had been waiting for its chance to be useful. Lognon. His overcoat had taken a spray from a passing car and kept it, as if to show what the world did to him when his back was turned. "You're walking," he said, as if this was suspicious. "Some of us have cars." "Your car doesn't like you," Maigret said mildly. "It likes me as much as my wife does," Lognon said, which could mean anything. He drew closer, lowered his voice. "From the doctor," he said. "He says the old man's heart is the main actor, but there are traces on the neck, no strangling, no, don't look at me like that. Just the kind of thumbprint a man leaves without wanting to here." He touched his own jaw under the ear with a tenderness that did not fit his face. A pressure you could call a gesture. Did you ever try to help a man who was unsteady and push him in the exact wrong place? He says it is possible. He says also the shoes are a comedy and that he won't play. He lifted his chin as if to say he had delivered the message exactly and would accept applause in the form of information. "Tell him to keep his comedy," Maigret said. "It's not his kind of theatre." He paused. "Thank you." Lognon looked injured by the thanks. "The wife," he said, almost hopeful. "The neat one, I like those. They keep the house so clean the dirt shows." "She keeps her sentences as clean as her kitchen," Maigret said. "She remembers the briefcase." "Briefcase," Lognon said, quick. "Ah, I see. Papers," he added, with the contempt of a man whose cases had too often been resolved by signatures. "Papers," Maigret agreed. "But also one that is missing, or one that became another name between the station and a warehouse." Lognon's gloom took on a greedy gleam. "Smuggling," he said, tasting it as a child tastes a forbidden fruit. "Bureaucracy," Maigret said, which is another word for smuggling when it is done with stamps. Lognon looked disappointed and gratified at once, the way he always looked when the world confirmed his worst suspicions by offering him something less interesting. "I'll go and look at the husband," he said. "He has the face of a man who keeps numbers lined up. I don't trust numbers when they march." "Do not interrogate," Maigret said, and Lognon looked as if he had been deprived of a meal already paid for. "Stand in his office and ask to borrow a pencil. He will tell you something while you do not write." They parted like men who would see each other again in an hour and pretend they had not hoped to. Lucas had been quiet longer than usual. As they walked, he said, "Do you think the husband knew?" "I think the husband knows how keys turn," Maigret said. "I do not yet know if he knows which locker." He stopped at a tobacconist's to buy matches he didn't need, and came out with the news that the evening edition would be late because of a strike at the printers. "Good," he said. "When papers are late, men say things aloud to fill the place where the paper would have been." They went back to Armand Carrel, not to knock, only to pass the house and let it feel them go. By the lane at the back had dried into a pale ribbon, and a cat had installed itself on the gatepost, proving, as cats do, that surveillance can be idle. The constable was gone. There was no need for him in daylight. The ivy had dried only at the tops. Below it held the day's damp like a poor man's coat. "Tomorrow," Maigret said, almost to himself, "we go to the warehouses." "And today?" Lucas asked. "Today we look at a briefcase," he said, "not as the owner sees it, but as a man who has to carry it because it isn't his." He didn't ring. He went round to the lane and stood at the back gate for the space of 3 cigarettes he did not smoke, and when he had finished not smoking them, he felt that he knew a little more about what a gate knows. When he did knock at last, it was the woman who opened. She looked as if the day had taken a slice out of her and put it back. The briefcase, he said. She did not ask why. She went to the hall cupboard and took it down. It was old and the lock was indeed broken. It closed because a man had taught it how to pretend. He set it on the table and opened it. The inside smelled of leather and paper and faintly camphor. In one corner, a small scrap of brown gummed paper clung where the lining had been scuffed. He touched it with the tip of his finger. It lifted without effort, left a darker patch the shape of a square envelope that had once been there long enough to teach the leather its edges. "You cleaned nothing?" he asked, though he knew the answer. "I make soup," she said. "I do not clean briefcases." He put the scrap back and closed the case. "Thank you," he said, to the briefcase as much as to her. On the way out, he passed the office door, standing half open. Duroc sat at his desk with the ledger open and a pencil in his hand. He was not writing. He was looking at the column of numbers as if they had misbehaved and would fix themselves if stared at long enough. He looked up. "Do you require me for anything else, Inspector?" he asked, the words polite and made of wood. "Only for the moment you will provide without being asked," Maigret said. "It usually arrives after dinner and before bed, when a man has put on his slippers and discovers that they remember a different pair of feet." He did not wait to see if the man smiled. He went back out to the lane and stood a moment longer than the air required. Somewhere a radio began a tune about a river and a regret. Somewhere else a train moved with the sound of a cupboard drawer opening and closing. He felt the day make a small, almost inaudible click inside the case of itself. It was not yet the end of anything, but a name would have to come soon, not from a piece of paper, but from someone who had once believed in paper and now did not. He could sense it in the way the house held its breath between the kitchen and the office. He had only to wait there, at the place where breath becomes speech. Evening gave the street back to itself. The last carts were gone. The canal had turned to a strip of pewter, and the windows along Armand Carrel were lighting one by one, each square of yellow holding a small life in place. Maigret didn't go in at once. He crossed the street and stood in the doorway of the shuttered grocer's, his hat low, his hands in his coat pockets, and watched the Duroc house the way one watches a stove that has been set low to simmer. From time to time a silhouette moved behind the lace of the front room. In the kitchen, steam rose and fell against the pane like a breath. When he did knock, it was not with the knuckles he used for official visits, but with the soft part of his hand, as if he might be calling on a friend who disliked callers. Madame Duroc opened. She had put on a dark shawl, though the kitchen was warm. The soup on the stove was at that stage when it hardly looks like itself anymore. It had given up the idea of leeks and potatoes and become only soup. "You will eat?" she asked, not because she wanted him to, but because that is what one says. "When there is soup and a man at the door." "I have eaten," he lied politely. "Is your husband in?" "In his office." Her eyes went past him into the hall, toward the closed door. "He is counting." He did not ask to disturb the man. He sat at the table where the briefcase had been and accepted the cup of coffee she poured, as if both the cup and the pour belonged to the day's work. The radio was on, a murmur from a dance hall somewhere in the city where no one knew there had been a body in a garden this morning. A spoon ticked once against a plate. He let the room settle around him until it forgot that he had not been there. A minute ago, the office door opened a crack, stayed that way, then opened fully. Duroc came to the threshold, the ledger in his hand as usual. It seemed to have grown there. He looked as if he had taken off his public face and put on another. That resembled it very closely. "Inspector," he said, "if it cannot wait until morning, you may speak now." "It can wait," Maigret said. "Most things do, but phones do not." He nodded toward the instrument on the dresser. "Le Havre will call you. Perhaps not with that name. Perhaps with another's." Duroc's jaw tightened for a second and then relaxed in a way that looked practiced. "You seem to have made my affairs your hobby," he said. "I have few others," Maigret replied, and did not smile. From the hall, a bell sounded, half a bell, the kind that comes when someone lifts a receiver at the other end before the ring has finished. Duroc went in without looking at them, and the door closed gently. Sound is different through a door. The words flatten and the tone swells. Maigret heard the man say yes in 3 different registers and tomorrow twice. He heard document and client, and once something that was almost brother, cut off cleanly like a thread at a seam. When the door opened again, Duroc's face was the face of a man who has carried a parcel across a courtyard and found on arrival that it weighed less than he expected. "Trouble?" Maigret asked softly. "Routine," Duroc said. "There is always a paper that wants a friend." He put the ledger down with exaggerated care, as if the page might bruise. "Will you be here in the morning, Inspector? Or at the station with your lockers?" "I will be where men prefer not to see each other," Maigret said. "Often that is the same place." He got up, not hurried. "If you need to remember something before sleep, do it now. Sleep makes men honest in ways the morning does not reward." He left them to their house and walked without aim until the air in his coat changed and smelled of home. Louise had left the lamp on the table, the shade drawn low, the way she did when the day had made him late and she had decided not to be cross. The apartment had kept its warmth for him. He hung his hat, set his pipe on the sideboard, and listened to the silence arrange itself. There were nights when silence made a shape. Tonight it was the shape of a key turned twice, and a man who stood very still afterward to see if anyone had heard. "You won't like the soup I saved," Louise said, coming from the kitchen with her slippers quiet on the floor. "It has sulked too long." "I'll like it," he said, and he did, because it was from a pot that had cooked around a family and because it said nothing about warehouses. He told her pieces of the day in the way he knew she used them, not the names, not the addresses, but the small weights that belonged to anyone. The smell of the station, the boy with the bicycle, who had been brave in the wrong way, the man at the cafe who disliked being clever and lived at the door like a draft. "He is the sort of man who keeps paper in his breast pocket," Louise said, "so that when he bends to his plate at dinner it gives him indigestion." He looked at her across the lamp. "What does paper smell like when it is kept too near a cupboard and a winter bottle?" he asked. "Like no season at all," she said. "Like a drawer." "Why?" "No reason," he said, though there was one. The station clerk had smelled liniment. The tobacconist's sliver had smelled of gum. A paper that was clean and yet carried winter with it would be a paper that had lived in a wardrobe too long for its date. He went to the window and rubbed the condensation with his sleeve until the street appeared, already asleep. The telephone rang just before midnight, a respectful ring, as if the caller had put on a jacket to make it. He lifted the receiver and heard Le Havre in a man's careful voice. "Your consignment," the voice said without naming it. "A gentleman presented a delivery order late afternoon. It was in order and yet not. He had the name, the date, the stamp in the right place. He had the air of someone who believes he has done everything right and cannot think why the world refuses to agree. Our clerk hesitated because the paper smelled of moth. He says that is not a reason. I say sometimes it is. We told the gentleman to return at 8 with the person who had signed the order. He promised that person would be there. He did not give his own name. A coat that is good but not new," Maigret said, half to the line, half to the room. "Possibly," the man said dryly. "He left without anger. That is the part I distrust. Men who are angry make fewer corrections overnight." "Thank you," Maigret said. "Tell your clerk to have bad coffee in the morning. It keeps men waiting longer than good coffee does." He put the telephone down and stood looking at it a moment as if it had given him a riddle, and he wished to be polite before solving it. Louise had not moved. She always left him alone in the minute after a call. When he told her, she only said, "So you will be at the station in the morning." "At 2 stations," he said, "one with trains and one with soup." He did not sleep long. When he slept, he dreamed of rows of small doors with numbers and of men standing before them with keys that had remembered other pockets. He woke before the clock and lay with his hands behind his head, listening to Paris make its early sounds. The street being swept by a man who believed in small cleanings, a milk can on a step, a cough from a window 2 floors up. He dressed in the half-light and drank the coffee Louise handed him without looking at it. "Do you want your good hat?" she asked. "I want the one that has already learned the weather," he said. By 7 he was outside the Duroc house, not to knock, only to be part of the street's breath. The kitchen lamp was on. In the office a thinner light showed around the door. He saw the shadows of a man and a woman move separately and then together. and then apart. At past, he rang. Madame Duroc opened. She looked as if the night had been a piece of furniture that did not fit in the room and had to be moved every hour. "He has gone out already," she said, without needing to be asked. "Early. He said the firm expected him. He took the old case." The one with the broken lock. The same. Was it empty, she thought. He did not let it lie on the table. He held it by the handle. When a thing is empty, a man lets it lie. "Did Alfred ever hold it by the handle?" Maigret asked. "He carried it as if it were made of air," she said. "My husband carries things as if they might report him to someone if he drops them." He thanked her and went to the lane. Lucas came up at a pace that was not quite a hurry. "Our clerk at Le Puy Bleu woke early," he said. "Monsieur Paul came at 7 and asked for a newspaper he did not read. He left at once by way of the bridge and took a cab toward the Gare Saint-Lazare." Lucas's mouth twisted. "Not your Gare de l'Est. He doesn't like to be expected." "That is why." "Men have 2 stations," Maigret said. "Did he have a bag?" "A flat one," Lucas said. "The kind that will slide under a seat and make a man feel it touch his ankles every time the train stops." "Good. Go to Saint-Lazare. Do not follow him onto a train. Stand where a man stands when he believes he has fooled you, and let him see you." "And you?" Le Havre threw the telephone, he said. "And here." He went round to the front again and stood under the lintel for the space of 1 cigarette he did smoke. The cat on the gatepost looked at him, and then at the middle. Distance as cats do when they dislike to admit an interest. In the kitchen a plate touched the sink. In the office silence had become a thing. When he set out it was toward the quay and the line to Le Havre, but he did not hurry. He stopped at the locksmith's to ask after nothing, and was told in the manner of a man eager for his grievance to be useful, that the boy with the bicycle had come down the stair twice in the night and once very early, and had left the key on the counter with too much relief. "If you're taking him," the locksmith said, "tell him the rooms won't improve wherever he goes. They all need the same dusting." "He'll stay where he is for now," Maigret said, and the old man looked disappointed and gratified at once, as if a small sorrow had been kept alive for company. At the quay, the air had that metallic brightness mornings get when there has been rain and promises not to be. He telephoned Le Havre again and asked for the man who owned the clerk's hesitation. "We will be there with our paper and with the man who signed it," the voice said calmly. "If the man who brought it yesterday brings another man instead, we will be ready to be surprised." "Surprise is a poor breakfast," Maigret said and hung up. He did not go to the train. He returned to Armand Carrel a last time, before the hour when clerks step out of offices for the comfort of a cigarette. He did not ring. He stood in the lane where the earth had dried to its own color and considered the gate. Its latch had a small recent polish on the inside, a shine that came of a hand that has gone over the same metal twice in a day. He put his thumb where another thumb had been and pressed as if to steady a man rather than to open a door. Under his finger, the place the doctor had touched on his own jaw seemed to answer. A gesture, not a violence. A man helping another and pushing him in the wrong place at the wrong time. Shoes that stayed clean because the ground was walked by someone else. A briefcase held by the handle because it was not empty. He went back to the front and knocked, and when no one answered, he knocked again, longer. The office door opened at last. Duroc stood with the case in his hand. He had put on his overcoat. The pencil behind his ear was a little too sharp, as if he had wanted it that way. "You are going to the firm," Maigret said. "I am going to the station," Duroc replied, as if the two were not different. "They need me there." "They need your name," Maigret said. "It is a steady name. It does not tremble when a warehouse clerk writes in his book." For a second the man's face lost its arrangement. He looked absurdly like his brother had looked in the mirror, deciding what kind of boy to be. Then the arrangement returned. "If you wish to come," he said, not quite insolent, not quite inviting, "you may stand at the door and watch me do an errand." "I prefer to stand where men prefer not to be seen," Maigret said. "It troubles their hands." He stepped aside. The corridor smelled of camphor, and a little of soup, and a little of the morning's cold. On the hall table was a small object that did not belong there, a brass luggage tag with a number, and the words, "Compagnie des Entrepôts." It had been put down as if to remind itself to be remembered. It had, in doing so, betrayed its purpose. Maigret did not touch it. He only looked at it long enough for the man to see him looking. "You dropped something," he said. "It is nothing," Duroc said. He picked up the tag and slipped it into the breast pocket of his coat, where it would give him indigestion at dinner if he got that far. "Then we will see nothing," Maigret said. They went out together into the morning that had decided, after all, to be a day. The cat abandoned the gatepost without hurry. On the canal, a barge moved with the sound of a cupboard drawer closing. Somewhere in the city, a tram bell kept its appointment with itself. They walked without speaking as far as the corner, the briefcase swinging once against Duroc's knee and then not again, as if it had remembered it was meant to be discreet. The morning had decided to be cold rather than wet. The air had the clean bite of a knife. Traffic moved with the polite impatience Paris has when it believes it deserves better weather. At the tram stop, Duroc lifted his chin towards Saint-Lazare, as if to say there was only one sensible direction for a man with work to go. Maigret didn't contradict him. They rode standing, each holding a strap. The car smelled of wool, and yesterday's rain steamed out of coats. A woman with a laundry basket had set it on her feet like a cushion. A boy slept with his head against the glass, mouth open and unembarrassed. In the concourse at Saint-Lazare, light fell from the high roof in great grey panes that made the pigeons look theatrical. The clocks, serious as judges, gave nothing away. Men with small bags walked with bigger purposes than their luggage could explain. Coffee stood up from cups in flat little spirals. The place had that feeling stations get in the hour before departures, as if each minute were checking its ticket. Maigret saw Lucas before Lucas made a sign. He was by the bookstall, pretending to examine a postcard of the cathedral. He did not look up, only closed his hand once and opened it again, which meant he had seen the man they were both thinking of, and that the man had seen him back. The gesture did not say where. It didn't need to. There are only so many places near the doors where a man like that stands. They found him without having to find him. The coat that had not been born to its wearer, the hat that gave more confidence than the head beneath possessed. He was near, the barrier half-turned, as if his shoulders were an extra pair of eyes. He didn't put down his newspaper because he wasn't reading it. Duroc saw him too, the way a horse will see a gate it has been made to refuse, by looking everywhere else and letting the body show what the eyes won't. "You will miss your train," Maigret said conversationally, although no train had been announced yet. "I am in time for all trains," Duroc said. He kept his voice even. It was the kind of evenness that has to be sharpened. Le Havre asked for a name yesterday, Maigret went on, as if remembering a weather report. "They will see 2 this morning, perhaps 3. Names look better in company." "I am a name," Duroc said. It could have been pride. It sounded more like an argument rehearsed against an empty chair. A whistle sounded from somewhere that had nothing to do with their platform. Monsieur Paul took 3 careful steps toward the barrier and stopped. He was weighing not the time but the texture of it. He lifted his head half a finger's width, and that was his way of acknowledging that there were policemen in the room. He didn't bolt. Bolting would have been a judgment on his own cleverness. "Shall we have a coffee before you go?" Maigret asked Duroc. He said it the way a man suggests a cigarette to make a pause reasonable. "I don't drink coffee before travel," Duroc said automatically, and then, because it had been automatic, he looked annoyed with himself. They stood, anyway, at the marble rail of the bar and let cups appear. The steam had the sour-sweet smell of chicory, and Porter passed close, whistling under his breath, and the tune became part of the cup in a way that made no sense, and made perfect sense. When they had stood long enough to be men with cups rather than men on business, Maigret said very mildly, "Alfred fetched a paper for you." Alfred fetched nothing for me. The answer came too quickly. It was the kind of quickness men use when they want words to arrive before their faces. For the firm, then. "For decency," Duroc said, surprising himself. He wanted to be useful. He wanted a piece of someone else's job to hold in his hand. He wanted to stand in the morning among men who had things to do. He looked into his cup. "It is hard on the ones with no work. They begin to believe errands are favors they are owed." "And you owed him one," Maigret said. "A formality to help the firm, a locker key, a small paper, clean." "A delivery order," Duroc said. and the term fell on the air with the finality of a stamp. There was a confusion at the warehouses about a new client. A name was written in the wrong column and then written again in the right one. It happens. You can move a parcel with a signature if the signature stands up in a room. My signature stands up. Alfred's hand is neat. He went to fetch a piece of paper that belonged to our desk so that a clerk in Le Havre would not have to make a decision. Men who make decisions badly remember them too long. And afterwards? Maigret asked, not because he needed the answer, but because he wanted to hear the words become the shape of the thing. Afterwards, Duroc said, staring at the concourse where nothing happened and everything arranged itself, he brought it back. He brought back the idea of it. He was proud. He had made a path. He wanted me to walk it. He said a man at a cafe would be near the door to make it easier. He had done the awkward part. He swallowed. He had the smell of rain in his coat. The man at the cafe took the paper, Maigret said. He did not turn his head toward the doors, where the man at the cafe had become part of the traffic by doing nothing more than standing. He took nothing from me, Duroc said flatly, which was a way of making a distinction that had no life. Outside his own chest. And then the garden, Maigret said. He was unsteady. You put your hand on him to help and found the wrong place. Duroc's jaw moved as if it would rather grind the words than release them. When they came, they were not dramatic. He stumbled, yes. He had that way of standing, on the edge of himself. I put my hand. You know there is a place, Hanoi. Touched his own jaw just behind the ear. Not quite. The way men touch poison ivy without meaning to. He went soft under my fingers as if he had been waiting to do it. He slid down like a coat from a hook. I thought he had only fainted. Then I knew he had not. He put the cup down with too much care. Men are careful when they want to unspoil something that is already spoiled. I made him neat, he said, and his voice had the embarrassment of a man admitting to a sentimental gesture. He didn't like untidiness. I closed his coat because he would have closed it himself. He stopped. Yes. I carried him where he would have wanted to be seen, not by the gate, like a thief. And the shoes, Maigret said. The stones are wide, Duroc answered, almost indignantly, as if accused of clumsiness in his own garden. If you set your foot right, you need not muddy it. Ask any man who keeps a path. For a long breath, the station gave their silence a place to sit. At the barrier, a loudspeaker coughed and announced a delay in a voice that pretended not to be human. You will not board, Maigret said after the announcement ended, as if the two matters were connected by the same wire. You prevent me? Duroc's eyes didn't shift. He wasn't looking for escape. He wanted to measure the size of his box. I ask you, Maigret said. Le Havre will telephone again. There will be men there to ask decent questions of the clerk about a paper. That smells of winter. Lucas will talk to the man who doesn't like being clever. He too is fond of doors. He will open one he prefers to keep shut if someone stands on the other side and says nothing. I didn't kill him, Duroc said. He had chosen a place for the words between his teeth and his throat and put them there. No, Maigret said. You arranged him, which is a different crime. You used him, which is not a crime in books but is one in kitchens. Duroc's mouth moved once in a shape not far from a smile, and not near one either. You sound like my wife, he said, and the admission surprised him into taking air as if he had been under water. She will say it differently, Maigret said. She will set a plate on the table, and it will make a noise that says it. Across the concourse, Monsieur Paul made a movement, as if to take a step, and then took none. A man who was not a policeman became one just by the way he stood near him. Lucas had the trick of not being there, while occupying all the air a man needed to breathe comfortably. The better coat man changed nothing in his face, and changed his mind in his shoes. You may come with me to the quay, Maigret said, or I can send someone to your office at noon and they will ask to borrow a pencil. You know which is kinder. Duroc nodded once. He picked up the briefcase by the handle. He held it a fraction tighter than before, as if it might tell someone a story if it were allowed to swing. They walked back the way they had come, against the small current of people for whom the station was a promise rather than a test. The pigeon on the beam turned its head and watched them, as if habit had taught it that men sometimes fed themselves by watching other men. On the tram, there was a child with a red scarf, whose mother kept putting it back around his neck because he preferred it loose. 2 workmen discussed a strike that would be over before their soup. The city had already put away the morning in a drawer and was making its mind up about noon. "You used the man at the cafe to ease a door," Maigret said mildly when they were on the street again. "He will not open it for you now." "He will open it for someone," Duroc said, with the chilly certainty of a man who knows how doors work. "It is what he sells." "You will tell me his other name," Maigret said without insistence. "In a room," Duroc said, "not on a pavement." They walked through the small weather of each doorway's exhale. At Armand Carrel, the house stood as if it neither expected nor feared them. The kitchen window was open a finger's width. Steam made a line and disappeared. In the office, through the crack, the ledger lay open, the pencil waiting, an instrument that believed work would return to it if it looked patient. On the hall table, a ring where the luggage tag had sat was already fading like a wet glass lifted. "Go and tell your wife you will be late for lunch," Maigret said, not unkindly. "Tell her not to wait to salt the soup. It will need it. She doesn't salt early," Duroc said, and the absurd loyalty in the remark landed on the air with a weight that made it not absurd at all. He went in. He stood a second too long in the doorway of the kitchen, as men do when they are about to tell an ordinary truth that will change the hour. The shawl moved on the back of a chair. A spoon touched the rim of a pot. The house leaned a little toward its own center. Maigret stepped aside. He didn't listen. Listening would have made it into theater. He went out to the pavement and stood there without lighting his pipe. It was enough to be the shape of a man outside a door. He let the minutes take their time, and then he walked slowly toward the quay. On the way, he stopped at a tobacconist to ask for matches, and learned, not because he asked, but because people talk, that the evening paper would now come on time after all. Good. When papers arrive as they should, men feel the need to say less. What they do say is often the piece that matters. At the quay, he telephoned Le Havre and left a sentence with a man who understood sentences and preferred them to orders, that a gentleman with a good but not new coat might arrive alone, or with a name, that the clerk should let the paper live on the counter long enough to show its season, that the coffee should be bad and the chairs ordinary, that when a man sits down at an ordinary chair with bad coffee in front of him, he is more himself than when he stands at a splendid counter with steam. When he put the receiver down, he stood for a moment with his hand still on it, as if the line might yet carry back the taste of the sea. The office smelled of damp wool and tobacco, and the ink that makes policemen think better of their own handwriting. Lucas came in with the look of a man who has kept an appointment with a stranger and not been disappointed to find the stranger knew about it. He didn't take the train, Lucas said. He turned and walked along the platform until the end and stood there as if there were a garden. Then he left by a door no one uses and got himself a cab that didn't want to be seen. I saw the number anyway. "He will go to a room with paper," Maigret said. "It is where he breathes. And the husband, he will sit in a room where soup is on the stove and say the sentence he should have said last night." "Will he use the word?" "He will use none of the words," Maigret said. "But he will be heard. It is enough. We will see him after lunch." He took his pipe from his pocket and held it a moment without lighting it, the way one holds an old habit to see if it still fits the hand. Outside, the sky brightened 1 degree and then thought better of it. The city arranged its chairs for the midday, which is a ceremony even on unremarkable days. He waited, because that was the work, to wait until the things other men had already. Dunn came to meet him without being chased. After lunch, the street had the tempered lull of an afternoon that won't dare to brighten. He went back to Armand Carrel without hurrying. The house met him with the small draught of a door that has been opened and closed too many times in one day. In the kitchen, the pot had been pushed aside and the flame trimmed until it was barely a coin of blue. The shawl on the chair back had fallen to the floor and been lifted again. You could tell that much and not be wrong. He didn't knock on the office. He stood where the corridor narrowed and let them find him. It was the woman who emerged first. She had tied her hair back so that nothing would fall into the soup, and in doing so had taken 10 years from her face that the day immediately gave back. She didn't ask him to sit. She didn't need to. "He told me," she said, in the tone one uses to say the glass is cracked. He said he touched him where one ought not. He said it was helping, and then it was not. He said he made him neat because Alfred liked neatness. He said—" She stopped. "He said a paper should have been just a paper and not a man between two doors." He waited for the rest, and because there wasn't any, he nodded, as one nods. To the end of a prayer when one isn't in church. Duroc appeared then, the briefcase nowhere in sight, his hands empty like a man's after moving a chest he shouldn't have tried alone. He looked used up rather than defeated. He had shaved too closely along the jaw and left a red line where the skin had objected. "You'll have it," he said, with a small movement of the head toward the K, the way one yields a parcel already stamped. "What I know. What I did. The name of the man at the door. You'll have the figure of it. I will not embroider the cloth." "We will take the cloth as it is," Maigret said. "The rest is for the tailor." He didn't offer a cigarette. Some men smoke their courage. Others unspool their words better with empty hands. They walked together to the car, the woman standing at the threshold with the shawl across her arms, not because she was cold, but because that is how one stands when a man leaves to tell his own story in a room where chairs scrape. At the quay, the corridors had their usual smell of damp paper and tobacco that thought well of itself. In the small room with the high window, he put Duroc at the table and did not sit opposite, but a little off to the side, where men speak more easily and are less tempted to arrange their faces for the enemy across from them. Lucas came and went with that noiselessness he used when he had news he wanted to hold in place until it was asked for. "From Le Havre," Lucas said at the door, with a glance that asked permission, and received it. "The gentleman with the good but not new coat has presented himself. He had a delivery order that had been copied from another and cleaned." The clerk set the first beside the second and let them sit. The ink had different winters. Our man said, "The signature was a formality. They prefer signatures that aren't." "The consignment?" Maigret asked. "In the warehouse, still a box with its name on it. It will remain a box with its name. The gentleman will remain in a chair with bad coffee until we say he may stand. He has given a name. It is the one you expected." "Monsieur Paul," Maigret said, and it wasn't a triumph. It was only a name falling to the table the way a small tool falls where it belongs. Lucas's mouth twitched. He had also in his pocket a second locker key blank, the kind that remembers other numbers. The patron at Le Puy Bleu will remember him more clearly now that he must. The boy with the bicycle remembers him well enough already. "Good," Maigret said, not to be pleased, only to mark a piece on the board. He turned back to Duroc. "You see the shape," he said gently. "A man who has left his desk for a door, a boy who carries things without wanting to know their weight, an older man who wanted to be part of the morning. Between them, a paper that was made to fit a name and chose the wrong pocket first." Duroc spoke without effort now. The words had waited all day and were glad to go. He told it the way careful men tell things, from the chair in his office to the kitchen, where Alfred had stood with the old briefcase under his arm and the look of a boy borrowing his father's hat, from the key that was pressed into a courier's palm to the locker that opened its mouth on a folded order, whose stamp had slept too long in a wardrobe, from the cafe doorway, where a man with a good coat disliked being clever to the back gate, where rain had made the wood soft along the latch. He told the gesture with his hand, as if he could undo it by placing it properly here. He did not sweeten. He did not blacken. He put the coat straight and owned that he had done so. "Why not call?" Maigret asked at last. And it wasn't reproach. He truly wanted to know when you saw he was not fainting but falling away. "I don't know," Duroc said. The admission hurt his mouth a little. A man like him dislikes not knowing, because Alfred hated fuss, because his heart had always been a small fuss in his chest, and I thought this was only that fuss louder. "Because," he looked at his hands, "because if I called at once, men would come before I could put the paper back in the desk where it belonged." "And there it is," Maigret said. He felt no need to say more. In the hallway, a typist passed with a stack of forms that would outlive the conversation and did not matter to it. When it was written, when the words were copied in their turn into the paper that prefers to eat other paper, he did not say "murder" to the man. He did not need to. The doctor's thumb on his own jaw and the clean shoes and the place on the latch said enough about chance and pressure and guilt that carries itself like a work bag. He told him the words he would hear from the examining magistrate: non-assistance, staging, attempted fraud. They sounded bureaucratic, and they were, but in kitchens, as he had said, they had other names. The telephone on the filing cabinet rang with the mild self-importance of instruments that carry news. Lucas lifted it, listened, and handed it to Maigret. It was Saint-Lazare, not Le Havre. The man who disliked being clever had found a room with paper nearer to his habits. He had been taken there instead of anywhere more dramatic. On his desk were carbon copies with careful erasures, a rubber date stamp that told the truth about its day, and in the drawer a list in a neat hand of names that could be made to fit boxes if one were patient with doors. "Bring him," Maigret said, and put the receiver down. He felt no satisfaction. It was all as ordinary as the noon light across the quay. He walked Duroc to the threshold and stopped him with a hand at the elbow that was nothing like the hand at the back of a jaw. "Your wife," he said. "She will be asked to say what time the soup boiled. She will say it without embroidery. Let her keep her dignity. It is worth more than the cost of your mistake." "She has more of it than I do," Duroc said quietly. "Alfred had the rest." "You will have some left," Maigret said. "It comes back when the noise goes." They put him in the room where chairs scrape and shut the door, not hard. It was not his kind of theatre either. In the corridor, a boy carried a typewriter the way one carries a baby one doesn't know how to hold. Out the window, the light had shifted 1 degree toward evening, and with it the city had changed its mind about what it would do with itself. Before going home, he walked once more past Armand Carrel. He didn't stop. He let the house see him pass and keep its face. In the lane, the ivy had dried, except where the wall held the day's last damp. The gate looked what it had always been, a piece of wood that separates one small world from another. It knows nothing of papers and names. It learns only the weight of hands. At Boulevard Richard Lenoir, Louise had set 2 plates with that modest authority she applied to all arranging. She had left the radio low, a far-off dance in a room that wasn't theirs. He washed his hands not because they were dirty, but because hot water returns them to themselves. "Well?" she asked, pouring the beer as if it were summer for a moment. "He touched him in the wrong place," he said. "He made him neat. There was a paper." "There is always a paper," she said. "If it is not on the table, it is in the drawer." He thought a name would carry a box across a sea, he added, almost to himself. "A name will carry a man across a street if he believes in it," she said. She put the salt not by his plate, but between them. He smiled a little at that. They ate without talk for a while. Eating is a way to let the day cool. After, with the lamp making its little circle, he told her the rest in pieces that had no proper names, the way one talks about weather and neighbors and a cat that has moved from one post to another. "What will they do with him?" she asked. "They will count what is his and what is not," he said. "They will decide how much of the accident belongs to him and how much to chance. They will make him sit, and then they will make him stand." He drew on his pipe without lighting it. "The other one will be tidier. He will put away his stamp for a while and take it out again later in another street." She nodded, not because she agreed, but because she knew he believed it. "And the boy with the bicycle? He will bite his nails for a month and then forget to," he said. "He will carry lighter things." He went to the window and wiped the mist with the side of his hand. It had not started raining again, but the air had that promise in it. Along the boulevard, the trees were black cutouts against a sky tired of its color. Somewhere a tram made its appointment with itself. He could see a woman cross with a parcel and a child who didn't want a scarf. It was Paris being Paris, which is a balm one learns to accept without insisting it heal. He thought not unkindly of Alfred at the end of the garden path, seeing a horizon where there was a wall, of the way some men keep order because they are afraid of the little draughts that come under doors, of a paper that smelled of winter and a stamp that told the truth without meaning to, of a thumb on a latch and another on a jaw, both meant for steadiness and becoming something else. He didn't dignify his mood by naming it. He stood another minute and then turned back to the table, where Louise had put the coffee on and the lamp had made the room small enough to hold the day. He took his cup, and for a time the silence between them was the kind that isn't empty at all. When he set it down, the saucer made a sound as soft as a gate that has learned again to close. Without being seen,